New England's deadliest conflict. King Philip's War: Untold Truths. A severed head, displayed on a pole at the entrance to Plymouth Colony, blood still dripping from the neck. Flies gathering around the lifeless eyes. This wasn't just any trophy of war, this was Metacom known to the English as King Philip. The man who had nearly brought the entire New England colonies to their knees. With the death of King Philip and the severing of his head, brought to Plymouth as a warning to all others that they were in control, the brutal display remained there for 25 years. A quarter-century reminder of what happens to those who resist. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories to uncover the truth behind America's forgotten conflicts. How did a powerful Native leader go from commanding thousands of warriors across 6 tribes to becoming a gruesome colonial trophy? And more importantly, how did a conflict that killed 30% of the English colonial population and devastated 90% of the Native Americans in southern New England get erased from our common history? Long before Metacom's head became a colonial trophy, the Stage 4 conflict had been meticulously set, not through a single dramatic event, but through a century of silent devastation and cultural collision. The numbers tell a story more horrific than any battlefield. Native villages, once bustling with life, stood empty. Hunting grounds, once teeming with hunters, fell silent. Fishing spots passed down through generations lay abandoned. Bodies piled up not from arrows or bullets, but from invisible killers that arrived with the first European ships. Our people die like leaves falling from trees during the first frost. Recounted a Wampanoag elder whose name is lost to history. We bury our children, our parents, our brothers and sisters, our medicine men pray, but their prayers return unanswered. The impact was catastrophic. In just 100 years preceding King Philip's War, up to 90% of the native population had been wiped out by European diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, ailments for which they had no immunity and no defense. Where once stood powerful nations of thousands, now remained mere shadows of communities, weakened not only in numbers but in their ability to resist what was coming. As native numbers dwindled, English settlements multiplied. The Plymouth Colony, established in 1620, had expanded to dozens of settlements by 1675. English farms pushed inland inland each year, encroaching on hunting grounds and agricultural lands that had sustained native communities for thousands of years. Governor Josiah Winslow of Plymouth Colony surveyed the expanding territories with satisfaction. God has cleared the lands for our inheritance, he proclaimed to his council in 673. Where the savages once roamed, now stand proper English towns and fields, as the Lord intended. His words reflected a growing colonial attitude that the decimation of native populations was divine providence, clearing the way for English settlement. This philosophy fueled what native leaders came to call the unquenchable hunger of the English for land. By 1675, the strategic coexistence between English settlers and the native population in New England had been stretched to its breaking point. The unyielding English land hunger pressed against increasingly desperate native communities fighting for survival. But the conflict ran deeper than competition. For physical space, it was a fundamental collision of worldviews about the very nature of land itself. Captain Thomas Church, who would later become a key military leader against Metacom, recorded a conversation with a Wampanoag sachem. He told me that land cannot be owned any more than the wind or the stars. They believe they can use it, live from it, but not possess it forever, as we claim to do. The English concept of land ownership, individual, permanent, exclusive, documented on paper, was utterly foreign to native peoples, who viewed land through a lens of seasonal use, communal rights, and spiritual connection. Native communities typically moved their settlements every 3 to 4 years, allowing the land to recover, a practice incomprehensible to English sensibilities. of permanent occupation. The Wampanoag didn't understand that. They were signing away permanent deeds to land, wrote colonial administrator William Bradford. In his private journals, what they thought was permission to use we recorded as transfer of ownership in perpetuity. This misunderstanding wasn't merely conceptual, it had practical consequences, exploited by colonial authorities. John Easton documented in his accounts that native leaders accused English representatives of deliberately intoxicating during land negotiations, causing them to sign away far more territory than they realized. They make our chiefs drink the strong water until their minds swim like fish in troubled waters, complained one Pokanoket warrior to a Dutch trader in 1906-171. When they can barely stand, papers are brought forth for marking. The next morning, we discover another hunting ground is gone forever. The colonial legal system further entrenched these inequities. Native leaders found themselves entangled in English courts, where proceedings were conducted in a foreign language, operating on foreign principles. Debts accumulated often through dubious means became justification for further land seizures. When Metacom, known to the English as King Philip, became sachem of the Wampanoag after his brother's suspicious death in 1662, he inherited not only leadership, but mounting grievances. The son of who had once aided the struggling Pilgrims during their first winter, now faced a colony that had grown powerful at his people's expense. My father was the first to welcome the English. Metacomet reportedly told English officials during a tense 1671 meeting in Taunton, he gave them corn when they were starving. He gave them land when they had none. How have you repaid his kindness? By taking more, always more. Religious tensions further inflamed the situation. Missionary efforts led by figures like John Eliot established praying towns, where native converts lived under strict Christian governance, separated from their traditional practices and communities. By 1675, approximately 1,100 praying Indians lived in 14 such settlements, creating divisions within native communities and resentment among traditional leaders, who saw these conversions as further erosion of their authority and culture. The English colonial government increasingly treated and other native leaders not as sovereign authorities, but as subjects to be controlled. In 1671, Plymouth Colony forced to surrender native-owned firearms and sign a humiliating treaty acknowledging submission to English authority, a document he likely never fully understood. Due to language barriers, the stage was set for conflict. A decimated population, shrinking territories, cultural misunderstandings, legal manipulations, and growing resentment on both sides, as one English minister wrote ominously in 1674. The savages grow more discontented by the day, and whispers of rebellion reach our ears. From the forests we pray for peace, but prepare for war as prudence dictates. Little did he know that within months, New England would erupt into the deadliest conflict per capita in American history. The severed head on a pike at Plymouth Colony's entrance was still attached to a living, breathing leader who was about to shake the very foundations of English colonial ambition. The tension that had been building for decades finally ignited in a small settlement on the edge of colonial territory, Swansea, Massachusetts, June 1st, 675. The fuse of what would become America's deadliest conflict per capita was lit, not with a formal declaration, but with a series of escalating incidents that quickly spiraled beyond anyone's control. A band of Wampanoag warriors moved silently through the fields surrounding Swansea, fields that 2 generations earlier had belonged to their ancestors, their faces painted for war. They targeted not military positions, but civilian homes, breaking into barns, raiding storage sheds, and taking food supplies. These weren't random acts. Each raid targeted properties built on disputed land. They came not as an army, but as thieves in the night. wrote Reverend William Hubbard, a contemporary chronicler, taking what they believed rightfully theirs. Whether Metacom ordered these raids remains disputed. Some historical accounts suggest these warriors acted without his explicit approval. A faction of young men, too eager for confrontation to wait for their command. The raids continued for 3 days. With increasing boldness on the third day, a 17-year-old English colonist named John Salisbury spotted a warrior carrying off supplies from his family's barn, armed with his father's musket. Salisbury took aim. The single shot echoed across the settlement. The warrior fell, blood spreading across his chest. He became the first documented casualty. In what would soon bear the name, King Philip's war, word of the killing spread quickly through native encampments. The response was swift and calculated. 24 hours later, 9 English colonists lay dead in Swansea, their bodies left in full view. Along the main road leading into town, the message was clear: blood would be repaid with blood. They did not merely kill, reported colonial messenger Thomas Willett. They arranged the bodies as warnings, some with hands folded in mock prayer, others with their Bibles placed open on their chests. They meant to send a message beyond the killing. Colonial authorities immediately dispatched militia units from Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, and Connecticut colonies. 3 separate forces converged on Mount Hope Peninsula, where intelligence suggested Metacom had established his base camp. The colonial strategy was straightforward: surround the peninsula, trap Metacom and his warriors, and crush the rebellion before it could spread. But Metacom had anticipated this response. The English think us simple children, he reportedly told his council of war. They believe we will wait here, like deer surrounded by wolves. We will show them the Wampanoag are foxes, not deer. While colonial forces marched toward Mount Hope, Metacom executed a brilliant tactical withdrawal. Under cover of darkness, he moved his fighters, along with women and children, off the exposed peninsula and into the vast Pecosset swamp. In what is now Tiverton, Rhode Island, the dense, nearly impenetrable provided natural protection against colonial forces, unfamiliar with its treacherous terrain. When English troops arrived at Mount Hope, they found abandoned wigwams and cold fire pits. Metacom had vanished, with approximately 300 warriors and their families. The colonial forces, lacking both supplies for extended operations and knowledge of swamp warfare, could only establish defensive positions around the perimeter of the wetlands. Major William Bradford, son of the former Plymouth governor, surveyed the swamp's edge with visible frustration. "We have come hunting savages," he wrote in his dispatch, "only to find ourselves staring at an ocean of mud and twisted trees that seems to swallow our scouts whole." Colonial leaders, believing the conflict would be quickly resolved, severely underestimated both Metacom's tactical acumen and the widespread native dissatisfaction that would soon transform isolated skirmishes into full-scale war. By July 1675, the conflict had spread north. Metacom's messengers had reached other tribes throughout New England, carrying wampum belts, the traditional diplomatic tokens calling for alliance against English expansion. The Nitimuc Narragansett and portions of the Abenaki tribes began joining what was rapidly becoming a pan-tribal resistance movement. The colonial settlements in the Connecticut River Valley became the next theater of conflict. Deerfield, a frontier town in western Massachusetts, found itself suddenly vulnerable as native forces controlled the surrounding forests. Captain Thomas Lefevre received orders to evacuate the settlement's grain harvest, crucial supplies for the coming winter. On September 18, 1675, he departed Deerfield with approximately 90 men, including both soldiers and teamsters, escorting wagons heavy with wheat and corn. The column moved slowly along the forest road. The day was unusually warm for September. After several hours of difficult travel, they reached a small stream known locally as Muddy Brook. Lathrop called a halt. Men may drink and rest here. He commanded, keep your weapons at hand, but take water and catch your breath. Discipline slackened as soldiers laid down their heavy matchlock muskets to drink from the cool stream. Wagon drivers unhitched oxen to let them drink. None noticed the hundreds of eyes, watching from the dense underbrush that lined both sides of the narrow road. Mattawan, a Pocumtuck warchief allied with had positioned over 700 warriors in perfect ambush formation. He waited until the colonial force was at its most vulnerable. Weapons set aside, men scattered along the stream bank. The signal came a single bird call, followed by complete silence, as actual birds fled the impending violence. Within moments, the peaceful brook erupted into chaos. Warriors burst from concealment at point-blank range. The first volley of arrows and musket fire cut down dozens of English before they could reach their weapons. Those who managed to grab muskets found themselves surrounded, fighting in isolated pockets without command structure. The forest exploded, wrote the sole officer to survive the massacre. One moment, we stood by peaceful waters. The next, we stood in hell itself. The air filled with arrows, and the terrible screaming of their war cries. Men fell where they stood, many without drawing weapons. The slaughter was methodical and complete. 64 colonists, including Captain Laff, were killed. Only 7 escaped to carry news of the disaster. The native force suffered minimal casualties, disappearing back into the forest before reinforcements could arrive. When colonial troops reached the site the following day, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. Bodies lay scattered along the stream, which ran red with blood. The colonists renamed the location Bloody Brook, a name it bears to this day. The Bloody Brook Massacre, as it became known, sent shockwaves through the colonies. This was no longer a minor uprising, to be quickly suppressed. This was sophisticated warfare, conducted by an enemy, demonstrating superior tactical skill and coordination. While Bloody Brook represented the expanding northern front of the conflict, equally fierce fighting continued in the south. Benjamin Church, who would later become the colony's most effective commander against found himself in a desperate situation along the Rhode Island coast in July 1, 675. Church, leading approximately 20 militiamen, had been ambushed by a force of nearly 300 Wampanoag warriors outnumbered 15 to 1. Church's men took cover behind a small, earthen bank near the water's edge. For 6 hours they fought to maintain their position, as wave after wave of attackers pressed forward. The enemy poured and shot upon us. Church wrote in his subsequent account, the woods echoed with their shouts and yells. We had no shelter but a small bank and a little waterside hedge. For 6 hours we fought against 300 Indians with 20 men. Our ammunition ran low, our injuries mounted, and we prepared ourselves to die fighting. As the colonial position deteriorated, salvation appeared offshore. Captain Roger Golding, patrolling the coast in a small sloop, heard the gunfire and cautiously approached. Seeing the desperate situation, Golding maneuvered his vessel close enough to the shore to provide covering fire from the ship's swivel gun. The Lord delivered us through his divine providence. Church recorded, Captain Golding's sloop came within firing range, scattering the savages with grapeshot, and allowing those of us still standing to escape by boat. The pattern was clear by July's end. Where colonial forces confronted native warriors on equal terms, the English suffered devastating defeats. The traditional European military tactics, mass formations, volley fire, direct assaults proved catastrophically ineffective against enemies who appeared from nowhere, struck with deadly precision, and vanished back into the landscape. They knew, intimately, colonial settlements throughout New England realized they faced not merely a rebellious sachem and his immediate followers, but a sophisticated alliance of multiple tribes, united by a common existential threat. The conflict, that began with raids on a single settlement, had within weeks, transformed into the deadliest war New England had ever experienced, and the once respected diplomatic partner of the colonies, had emerged as a brilliant military strategist, whose severed head would eventually become the gruesome trophy displayed at Plymouth Colony's gates, but that fate lay in the future. In the summer of 1675, he remained very much alive, and very much winning the war that would bear his English name. By December 1675, 6 months into the conflict, both sides recognized the war had evolved beyond local skirmishes into something far more devastating. Winter's grip had tightened across New England, with snow blanketing the landscape and temperatures plummeting well below freezing. Most European military commanders would have halted operations until spring. The colonial leaders chose differently. The United Colonies, Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth and Connecticut, assembled their largest military force ever. 1,000 men under the command of Governor Josiah Winslow of Plymouth. Their target was not Metacom's, who remained elusive in the region's vast forests, but the powerful Narragansett tribe. Though the had maintained official neutrality in the war's early months, colonial authorities suspected them of sheltering Wampanoag refugees and providing supplies to Metacom's forces. More importantly, the Narragansett controlled prime territory that the colonies had long coveted. On December 16, 1675, the colonial army marched through knee-deep snow toward the Great Swamp in what is now South Kingston, Rhode Island. Intelligence from native allies had revealed the location of Cannon Chase Fort, a heavily fortified Narragansett settlement, constructed specifically for winter protection. Joshua Taft, an English colonist, who had gone native and joined the was captured during a reconnaissance mission. Under torture, he revealed a weakness in the fort's defenses, a section of wall still under construction. The stockade stands 18 feet high on 3 sides. Taft gasped through broken teeth, but the western approach remains unfinished.